guys, good to see you again, second time around. Glad that you came over here for dinner. In fact, you're gonna have a wonderful dinner. We're gonna cook today a chuck roast, and I call it Italian style, primarily because I use Italian herbs and I use Italian wine. It's gonna be economical for you and your family. And this time what we're gonna use is we're going to use a chuck roast. A chuck roast is a pretty nice piece of meat, but at the same time it can be pretty, tough if you're not careful how you cook it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to kind of dry off the liquid that's in the package that you buy from the store. Once you do that, the next thing you want to do is you want to poke some holes in the roast with a sharp knife, and then you already have your garlic cut up into little wedges. And then you force that garlic inside the wedge or the little hole that you've made with a knife. Tie it up or have it already tied. The next thing that you do is you want to coat the roast liberally with salt and pepper. And then you're ready to cook. So let's get started, okay? First thing we'll do, we got this pot here, and you see that it's a cast iron pot. Well, now I'm not telling you that you have to use a cast iron pot to cook this roast in. Why spend the extra money? You can buy a pot of any kind, as long as it's a nice heavy pot with a nice tight lid on top of it. That's what you want. Because when you start braising it, you want that liquid to get around all of the meat, and then that way in the slow process of cooking is going to soften and tenderize the meat. And we're going to have to wait a couple minutes for this oil to heat up, which brings up a question of how much oil we put in it. Well, all you want to do is use olive oil, and just coat the bottom. And once this meat or the oil begins to smoke like it's doing right now, it's at high heat, just put your roast in there. Now you're going to hear a lot of sizzling. Hear it? That's good. And one other thing you want to remember too is that you don't want to force the meat. In other words, you're going to cook it for 30 seconds. No. The meat itself will tell you when it's ready to be flipped over. Each of these roasts have to be cooked or braised, I should say, or seared on each side, the top and the bottom and the sides. And the roast itself will tell you when it's ready because of the fact that it's going to be easier for you to pick it up. Therefore, why do we want to do that? Well, when you start sizzling or searing the meat, you're creating fond, which is actually what it is. It's the flavors, the salt, the pepper, the bits of meat that stick to the bottom of the pan. And so you want to have that because that creates more flavor for your roast or for whatever you're cooking. Okay, so let's see if this is ready. Yeah, you see how easy it comes up? Okay, just flip it over. See how good it looks? Nice brown color to it. That's what you want. That's a nice flavor that's going to be created for the roast and for whatever you cook with it. So now let's think about turning this over. Well, it looks like it's turning over. Easy enough. So now let's do the sides. Now you see again, that's nicely browned. The reason it's cooking so quickly or browning so quickly is because of the fact that you have the pot so hot. You just leave it there, brown it to one side, go around the whole roast. In the meantime, I'd like to tell you some of the ingredients that will go into this roast. Look over here. I have it already prepared. We're going to end up using, eventually we're going to use wine, water, we're going to use some peppercorns, we're going to use some flour, we're going to use some basil. And in here we have rosemary, thyme, and another herb that will be put into the roast so that it creates even deeper flavor for you as you cook this. This roast is going to take a while for it to cook because eventually you're going to leave it on top of the stove for probably, 2.5 hours. The first roast that I cooked took an hour and 30 minutes for it to be completely done. But the reason is because of the pot that I used. Cast iron pots hold heat very well and distribute heat very well. So things seem to cook faster in a cast iron pot. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the roast out of the pan and we're going to put it in a dish, and then we're going to start cooking the other vegetables. Set it aside. All right, let's start getting the vegetables over here. One thing I want to tell you is that in the recipe that I will show you, it calls for turnips. Now, a lot of people don't like turnips because they got a bitter taste to them. But you know what? If you boil these, the bitterness goes away. In fact, what I do is I buy small turnips. I peel them, cut them in half, put them in water, let it boil for about 20 minutes. So they don't get real soft. They just get soft enough so that when you put it into the roast, it will continue to cook. So that's one of the things that I'm going to wait on. Be one of the last things that I put into the roasts. So here we go with the rest of the product. I have onions in here. I have carrots, which I need to cut, which I thought I already had done. Well, what do you expect from an old guy like me? You know, I am 73 years old. That's ancient, isn't it? Anyway, here we go. 3 pieces of vegetables. Now, just put them all. The potato has to be cut in half. This is what they call a new potato, a red potato. Okay, let's put that in there. Now we'll go ahead and put in the other herbs that I have in here, which is, I told you that I don't cut them up. I just let the rosemary, the thyme, bay leaf go in there. The same thing with, what is this? Basil. I should have known, it's Italian. Put it in there. Now, put some peppercorn in there. Don't even have to grind it. Now we start cooking it a little bit. Lower the heat to about medium. Now, what you want to do is you want to add a little bit more oil. Figure that you're going to use about, tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of oil in here. Kind of just guess at it, you know? Because that's what you're going to be doing anyway when you start cooking. You're going to guess at it. You're not going to more than likely sit down and spend the time to measure all your ingredients. You're just going to guess at it. And it still comes out good. Okay, so what I'm doing right now with the oil is I'm picking up the fond that's in the bottom of the pot. And that fond is whatever bits of pieces of either meat or vegetables are stuck to the bottom of the pot. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it adds more flavor to it. Now, add a little bit of water. And you've got to use a good wine. A little Merlot would be fine. And again, that's going to help pick up the bits and pieces, the fond, on the bottom of the pot. Let this cook and simmer for a little bit. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to let this cook for a little bit, and then I have to take it out, because I'll show you what we're going to do. And so now we're down to the point where we want to take the vegetables out. We don't want to cook them too much because they're going to cook in the roasting pan with the roast, okay? So let's take them out. The nicest and most delicious roast that I have ever made. And again, it's one of the reasons is because of the type of wine that I used. Go. Okay, the wine that I use is one that's not really too well known. But let me tell you, I've cooked, not for years and years, but I've cooked enough to know good wine. And this wine was outstanding, and it's not that expensive. When I finished with this gravy, I couldn't believe how tasty it was. And you know, it even had a little bit of cinnamon taste to it. And you notice, first of all, that how I am making this roux, or this sauce, is I'm putting in the flour, but I'm doing it slowly. And I'm stirring the flour and the liquid down here very slowly and constantly. I don't want to put the whole amount of flour in there, because then it becomes lumpy. And then it's hard to really dissolve it. So here's what I'm doing it real slow. And when I see that it begins to dry up, I will either put water or a little bit of wine. This recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of flour. I have a little bit more than 2 tablespoons in here. The reason I did that is I wanted to make sure that I had enough in case I saw that I needed more flour. But right now it's working just fine. I use a little bit of my water. And at the same time, the alcohol in the wine is evaporating. But you're going to be surprised how good this sauce is. You may want to thicken it more later on at the end of the meal, of cooking your meal, or you may just want to leave it like it is. That's up to you. Okay. Now, just a little bit more. Okay, let's add a little bit more water to it, because eventually we're going to add some more. This is a little thicker now, and it's going to get thicker as it cooks. So let's put the roast back in there. Here we have that roast. Don't throw this juice away. Put it in there. Now, what you want to do is you want to put most of the wine. I have approximately 3/4 of a cup. So I'm going to put about 1/4 of a cup, and I'm going to put in here along with it some water. Almost all of it. I'll leave a little bit left in there so that I can use it to render it. Now, what you really want to do with this roast is you would like to have the water get up to about halfway of the roast. It's hard to tell on this one because the roast is on one side is thicker and this one is a little bit thinner. So I'm using the thin side as my measuring. So here it is. We're set. Now we cover it. Now, hey, go play for 2 hours. 2 hours, 2.5 hours have gone by, and we're going to test the way the meat is. Is it tender enough? Well, the easiest way to do it is take a sharp knife like this, nothing too wide, a little small steak knife. Poke the meat. If you don't find a lot of resistance when you push the knife through the meat, then the meat is tender enough for you to eat. If you find a little bit of resistance, that's fine, because now you're going to have to put the vegetables back in here, and they're going to cook for about anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes. And then by the time you get through with this, it's going to be ready and done. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the vegetables into the pot. Nestle the vegetables around your roast. This is going to cook, like I said, for about 45 minutes. You might want to bring the fire up, the heat up a little bit now, because remember, it's down by medium. It's down by medium. It needs a little bit more heat. So let's bring it up a little bit higher. Okay, then let it cook. Let it cook for half hour, 45 minutes. Now one of the last things that you want to do after everything is done, you know that the meat is tender enough, you know the vegetables are cooked, then what you want to do is take the meat out and the vegetables. Put the meat to one side, let it rest for about a half hour, or excuse me, for about 15 minutes. During that period of time, what you want to do is you want to strain the sauce. Why do you want to strain the sauce? Well, first of all, you've already gotten all the flavors that you're going to get out of your fond. And when you serve gravy or au jus, it looks nicer if the au jus or gravy is smooth, that it doesn't have the little bits of pieces of meat or vegetables in it. Okay. So here we are. We have the roast ready, but of course, because of the time restraints that we have in creating a video, I already cooked the roast yesterday. And yeah, I have it in the oven. You take a roast out. Now, this is the type of pan that you can use if you want to in cooking the roast. It has a real good seal to it, and the juices will stay in the pan. Okay, so here we are. Now what do we want to do? We want to be able to put the meat into a nice dish so that when you present it, it'll be real nice for people to look at. So here I want to show you what I've done. This is probably what you'll end up doing, is that's liquid in there is the gravy, the au jus, that has been thickened with thyme, with flour, and with wine. And I tell you one thing, I have never tasted anything so good. I was really surprised with that wine that I used. Okay, so let's put it out. This is the chuck roast. Notice how I sliced it. And again, that's where your sharp knife comes in. You want to be able to thinly slice this meat, because even though this roast in particular I know was only 2.5 pounds of raw meat, look at all the meat I got out of it. Now, generally speaking, I would put this sauce or this gravy in a gravy bowl and serve this with the food. Okay, now take your vegetables. Let's use a spoon. Put it along the edges when you present it. Now, French bread. I don't want to cut it. You know why? Because I'll eat the darn thing. But anyway, French bread makes nice slices. Put it on this empty little spot that you have here and serve it. Hey, next time I see you, I'm going to make a spaghetti sauce for you that I don't think you've ever really had. You know, people say, well, everybody makes spaghetti sauce their own way. And that's very true. But the sauce that we make, or that I make, along with the help of my wife, you'll actually be able to make 3 different meals out of the same sauce because of the way we cook it and the things that we put into it. So before we leave, I want to know how this looks and tastes like. So let's take a little piece here. Nice piece of meat. Tender. Oh my gosh. You know, you might be saying to yourself, well, he's just doing that because it's his meal, his recipe. No, believe me, I've made many roasts, but this sucker is good. It really is. So next time, I hope the spaghetti's as good as this. Ciao.